In August of '89, Ben Rich, who at the time was president and general manager of the Lockheed Skunk Works, called me at home. And we had an ongoing 20-plus year phone hookup, but once a quarter, Ben would call me, or I'd call him. And he said, Jim, said, I have it from the horse's mouth that the Blackbirds are not going to make it through Congress. And if anybody could scrounge one, it's you.
In 1988, Sergeant Jim Goodall of the Minnesota Air National Guard discovered the possibility of obtaining the A-12 for the Air Guard Museum. His labor of love ended in reality when the plane, disassembled for transport, rolled out of a New York Air National Guard C-5A cargo jet onto the runway in Minneapolis with Jim riding in the cockpit.
So I immediately, as soon as he said that, I said, okay, I'll start the ball rolling. I called the Adjutant General of the state of New York, and General Weaver, and I said, General Weaver, I called his office, secretary answered the phone, and said, this is Sergeant Goodall with the 133rd, which is the airlift wing here in Minneapolis. I said, is the general in? She said, just a minute, I'll connect you. And he came on board, and he said, Sarge, what can I do for you? And I said, sir, how would the New York Air Guard like to move the world's fastest airplane in a couple of your C-5s? Dead silence for about 10 or 15 seconds. And then he said, you mean the Blackbird? I said, absolutely. And he said, when you're ready, you call, we'll haul.
He was the man that made all others work as hard and tirelessly as they did so that this singular accomplishment could be realized.
This project, this airplane, the concept of Mach 3 flight would not have even been here if it wasn't for Kelly Johnson. Kelly just passed away last year. He was a man of all seasons. He was a Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison of aviation. The man did incredible things with minimal people. His philosophy was the KISS principle, to keep it simple. And the design of this airplane, as you look around it, as you look at the pieces and parts off this aircraft that's almost 30 years old, it's still the leading edge of technology.
Now, the thing about the Blackbird, Pratt & Whitney wanted to lease a C-5 from Air Force to move. They were hoping to get one in West Palm Beach. Air Force said, yeah, we'll lease you a C-5, but it's going to be almost $1 million a day plus gas. And the Air Guard C-5s is going to be a training scenario for moving outsized cargo. I probably couldn't do it today. There's too many idiots.
In order to get our Blackbird into a C-5, we have to take the outer wheel and brake assembly off of the landing gear. There's a maximum width on the floor of the C-5 of 19 feet. This extends out about 20 and a half feet. The SR71 is unique in the fact that it has 3 main gear wheels and tire assemblies per landing gear. We said earlier, everything on this airplane is unique, everything about it is special, everything had to be designed from scratch.
So I went to my boss, Major General Al Schwab. I said, General Schwab, I want to get a Blackbird for the museum. He starts laughing at me. I said, General, said, rather than just laugh at me, how about you give me the opportunity to fail? All right, smarty, how are you going to get it here? They don't fly. And I said, I got that covered. He said, what do you mean? I said, I called the Adjutant General of the state of New York. General Weaver said, when you're ready, you call, we'll haul.
The prized possession of the Air Guard's museum.
We've had a team of 12 of the hardest working, most talented guys I've ever had the pleasure to work with. They've all put their heart and soul into the program, and we're absolutely thrilled to be the recipient of the world's fastest operational aircraft.
So we have a C-5, or actually we have 2 C-5s that are available to us when the time comes, if we get the airplane. So I contacted this most senior guy in the Minnesota congressional delegation. And we got the entire Minnesota congressional delegation, 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, all to agree that the Minnesota Air Guard Museum should get a Blackbird for their museum, being that Honeywell, 3M, and Rosemont were key contributors to the program. Honeywell developed all the avionics, the autopilot, the stabilization augmentation system, the inlet control system. Rosemont, all the air data systems, static pitot tube and other pressure-related equipment. And then 3M was there with all their special adhesives. And it turns out of the original cadre of 11 Blackbird pilots flying the original A-12 out of Area 51, 5 of those 11 got their wings flying with the Air National Guard. Either the Tennessee Air Guard, the Georgia Air Guard, are the two that supplied most of the 5 pilots. So that was sort of our lead-in. And the fact that I'm a Blackbird fanatic and I got the call from the president of the Skunk Works, I felt we had a good shot at it. What we have here is a 103-foot long, 58-foot wingspan Blackbird that has been in storage since '68. This is now October of '91. They have not flown. The engines have been released. They've been pickled. They've been out in outside storage for most of the last 20 plus years. And it's one of the most complex airplanes to fly, just because of the environment it flies in. There weren't any motors available, and it would probably cost $10 million to get it flyable. We have to get fuel, we have to get tankers, we'd have to get all sorts of stuff. So it didn't make any sense to try to make it flyable. We didn't have the money. We were operating on a shoestring budget as it was. And I was able to move the Blackbird in 2 C5s with a crew of 24, 12 each on the C5s, and then we had 13 guys from our guard unit, air guard unit, that did the dismantling. And we took the airplane apart in 2.5 days.
After obtaining all the equipment needed to mount the operation and transporting it to California, the real work began. Technology brought the Blackbird to the forefront of aviation almost 30 years ago. Today, the Minnesota Guardsmen are having to combat that technology in finding ways to work on and dismantle the Blackbird. The greatest challenge in the recovery of the Blackbird was the removal of the wing-mounted engines. Thousands of titanium screws and rivets had to be removed.
And it took Air Force 6 weeks to take apart the SR71C trainer at Beale when they moved it to Hill Air Force Base. But these guys could do anything, and we took the airplane apart in 2.5 days. Now, we weren't gentle when we cut into the 18 wing beams. We used a K-12 rescue saw, and it was pretty exciting. When they took the first engine nacelle was cut, this is the engine nacelle and the outer wing panel, we thought the oleos in the landing gear were empty of nitrogen. But when we took that 10,000-pound piece off that side, the airplane popped up. And we thought the wing and engine nacelle had dropped. We had a big 10-ton forklift was doing the heavy lifting.
The fact that all of this work was accomplished by volunteers is truly amazing. Granted, these volunteers all had military aircraft experience, but they used vacation time, weekends, and spare moments stolen from their families to help the Minnesota Air Guard acquire this prize.
The world record that the New York Air Guard didn't submit it, but at the time, it was the largest object carried inside of another operational airplane.
The New York Air Guard's C-5A landed at Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport and taxied to the Minnesota Air Guard's ramp.
Not a special purpose like the Boeing Dream lifters, the 747s they modified, or the Airbus Belugas that they've modified to move large objects. Those are one-offs. This was a standard Lockheed-built C5A from the New York Air Guard. The floor area is 19 feet wide, 120 feet long, and its lowest point is 13 feet high. So when we cut the wings off, we had to take off the outer wheels and brake assemblies to fit on the floor, past the floor rails on the C5, and we had about 1.5 inches of clearance. So it was a tight fit, and I made the measure. I measured various C5s over the course of about a year to make sure that, I hadn't screwed up something. And one of the things, if the landing gear had been, if I had no clearance, but it was just contact on both sides, we could get a come-along cable ratcheting system and torque the landing gear in and make it through, but we didn't have to do that. But we had 3/4 of an inch clearance on either side when we finally had her in there and tied down.
3 years of dreams and hours of backbreaking work under the scorching sun were about to pay off for the Minnesota Air Guard. The Blackbird was beginning its final flight.
We left Palmdale at Air Force Plant 42 at what is now at the Skunk Works. And we flew in the C5 from Palmdale to Travis. They didn't have fuel for us in Palmdale. So we went to Travis, spent the night in the area. Next morning we got up. This is the 28th of October. We take off. We're out about 45 minutes, and the loadmaster, who's the Chief Master Sergeant, E9, he's going down the lower cargo compartment where my Blackbird is to make sure the load is secure. So I said, "Can I go with you?" And he said, "Well, normally the answer would be no, because you're not a crew member of the airplane. But this is your project. Come on down." So I did, and I went down. The counterbalance for the canopy was out of nitrogen. It's a metal canopy. But we had a wheel chock opening it up, keeping it open. So I climbed up in the landing gear, walked down on the chines, I opened up the canopy. The ejection seat was all the way down. I had a 5-gallon bucket in there with a cushion. I got into the cockpit, closed the canopy, and I'm in there for about 45 minutes going zoom, zoom. I mean, I'm just sitting there and I am beside myself. I'm at 33,000 feet at Mach 0.72 inside another airplane.
We made it. I mean, it was just incredible. The flight was great. We checked the aircraft half a dozen times in flight. I rode it for a little bit. I mean, I was sitting on top of it for about 15 minutes at 33,000 feet. But it made it. It's huge, it's gorgeous, and it could be 10 feet of snow out there and I wouldn't care. For the time I thought I could get it, I mean, I've wanted it for 28 years, but I had an idea we had a good chance of getting the airplane about 3 years ago. And today is it's the end of a quest. It's winning the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Stanley Cup all in one.
When we finally got to Minneapolis on the next day, on the 29th, I called Ben Rich up. And I said, "Ben, I think I've done something with the Blackbird that no one will ever be able to duplicate." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "I've been in the cockpit of a Blackbird at 33,000 feet at Mach 0.72 inside another airplane. And I also landed it being inside another airplane." He just laughed. He said, I almost wet my pants laughing so hard. He said, I should issue you a Mach 3 minus card since you're the only one ever to pull this off. I never did get one, but it was a nice gesture. But we got the Blackbird because of Ben Rich's involvement. And he's the one, I'm sure he greased the skids in Congress, and I know he greased the skids there at Air Force Plant 42. So it was you couldn't slap the grin off my face. That was basically it was probably the most incredible thing I've ever accomplished outside of being a dad.
It's like they say when you win the Super Bowl. Where you going? I'm going to Disneyland. Well, this is my Super Bowl, and I'm taking my Blackbird home. It's not my Blackbird, it's the Blackbird for the state of Minnesota, for the Minnesota Air Guard Museum, and for all the hundreds and hundreds of people who made it possible. And I can't thank them enough.